Hey everybody, welcome back. I hope you're enjoying this study. As we have reiterated throughout our time together, life is all about decision making. Our decisions determine the direction and quality of our lives, but good decisions require good questions. 5 in particular. So far we've discussed the integrity question. Am I being honest with myself, really? Question number 2 was the legacy question. What story do I want to tell? And you get to decide, but of course you decide one decision at a time. Then last time we explored the conscience question. Is there attention that deserves my attention? And that brings us to our 4th question, the maturity question. Now, I label this the maturity question because I'm convinced a person's willingness to ask this question says a lot about their maturity and their security. And the maturity question is this: what is the wise thing to do? What is the wise thing to do? Remember curfew? Curfew is a terrible idea. At least the traditional approach to curfew is a terrible idea. I mean, at 16 years old, curfew transformed me into an overly aggressive driver. On weekdays, I was fine. But on Friday and Saturday nights, not so much. And you can probably guess why. Because at the end of every date was divided into several 5-minute increments. Just 5 more minutes. I can stay for just 5 more minutes. And then 5 minutes later, I can stay for just 5 more minutes. And then 5 minutes later, I can stay for 5 more minutes. And before I knew it, I had to be home in, you guessed it, 5 minutes. I had to be home in 5 minutes, regardless of actually how many minutes it took me to get home. So when my boys started driving, I imposed a different version of curfew. I didn't tell them what time to be home. I told them what time to leave for home. And thanks to cell technology, I knew if they left on time. Now, you've experienced some version of this same dynamic as an adult, where your margin for error gets gobbled up with just 5 more minute thinking, right? Whether it's one more drink, one more bite, one more business trip, one more stack of chips, one more pair of shoes. The outcome is usually the same, isn't it? One more rarely adds up to anything. One more rarely adds anything. It usually subtracts. And here's my point. Whether it's curfew, diet, driving, or spending, our natural inclination is to live as close to the line as possible. The line between legal and illegal, the line between irresponsible and responsible, the line between moral-ish and immoral, the line between ethical and unethical. And it's not your fault. I mean, it's human nature to snuggle up to the edge of irresponsibility and stay there pretty much as long as possible. And of course, fueling this incessant flirtation with disaster is an unexamined assumption that informs our decision-making. This unexamined assumption makes us comfortable living, dating, spending, eating, drinking, driving, flirting, right at the edge of embarrassment, or maybe worse. And the assumption is, well, for the sake of clarity, I'll state it 4 different ways. Here's the assumption. If it's not wrong, it's all right. If it's not illegal, it's permissible. If it's not immoral, it's acceptable. If it's not over the line, it's fine. Now, if the problem with those assumptions is not immediately apparent, put on your older brother or your older sister hat for a minute. Or if you're a parent, put on your parent hat. I bet you don't set the bar that low for your younger siblings or your kids, right? I mean, those assumptions equate to asking, how low can I go? How close to bad without actually being bad can I get? How close to wrong can I get without actually doing something wrong? Or if you're a religious person, how close to sin can I get without actually sinning? But it doesn't stop there. Before long, we're asking the question, how far over the line can I go without getting caught or without experiencing any consequences? How long can I neglect my family, my finances, my health without feeling the effects? How much can I indulge in addictive behavior without actually becoming addicted? It's a slippery, sinister slope. And it all begins by asking the wrong question. Namely, and here's the wrong question, is there anything wrong with this? Is there anything wrong with this? Which often leads to a second question. How did I get myself into this? Drawing our lines or setting our limits or establishing our moral and ethical standards on the borderline between right and wrong, ethical, unethical, healthy, unhealthy, what happens is it eliminates all margin for error, right? It's a foolish and it's a dangerous way to live. It's why we respond the way we do when we see somebody we care for snuggling up to that elusive line. What do we do when that happens? We react. But we don't react to what they're doing. We react to where they're headed, right? In those moments, the issue is not right or wrong, legal or illegal, moral or immoral. There's something else in play, something that remains virtually invisible to us as it pertains to us, but something as apparent as the nose on our face when it comes to our children, a niece, a nephew, or perhaps the child of a close friend. And what is that something? That something is wisdom. Now, don't miss this. A decision can be both not wrong and unwise at the same time. A decision can be both not wrong, nothing wrong with it, and unwise at the same time. And thus, our fourth question, the maturity question. What is the wise thing to do? In other words, to avoid the 5 more minute syndrome, to create moral or ethical or financial margin, we need to ask of every invitation, every opportunity, and every option, what is the wise thing for me to do? Now, here's another angle. Isn't it true that your greatest regret, and when I say greatest regret, I'm talking about the moment of regret, the moment you would give anything to go back and relive or undo, the tipping point, the point of no return, that moment. Your greatest regret, isn't it true that your greatest regret was preceded by a series of unwise decisions? They weren't wrong, they weren't illegal, but looking back, they were terribly unwise. And it was that series of unwise decisions that paved the way to the moment in time you've regretted ever since. Now, our first 3 questions were anchored in ancient wisdom, and it will come as no surprise that our fourth one is as well. And this ancient wisdom comes from the pen of the Apostle Paul in a letter to Christians living in Ephesus. And here's what Paul wrote. He wrote, "Be careful then how you live, not as unwise," and here's our word, "but as wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil." Now, Paul's instructions are as relevant now as they were 2,000 years ago, and the reason is human nature hasn't changed. I mean, ancient folks apparently were as prone as us moderns are to snuggle up to the edge of disaster and, stay there as long as possible. Paul knew what each of us has already discovered, that the point of regret is always preceded by a series of unwise decisions. So with that in mind, he says, be very careful then how you live. In other words, don't be careless. This is the grid through which we should evaluate every invitation, every opportunity, whether it's financial, relational, or professional, or academic. And thus our question, what is the wise thing for me to do? Then Paul continues with a bit more explanation. He says, making the most of every opportunity, literally redeeming or ransoming the time. And what's the connection between these two ideas? Well, let me ask you this. Don't you wish you could go back and reclaim the time you wasted recovering from bad decisions? I mean, I do, not to mention reclaiming the money that I spent on bad decisions, right? And as painful as it is to look back, it's necessary to look back because in looking back, we can appreciate the invitation embedded in Paul's words. Paul is actually inviting us to invest our time wisely going forward. In other words, from this moment on, you are invited to make the most of or to redeem or to leverage your most important and valuable asset, your time. But he's still not through. He tacks on a warning. Here's what he writes, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. Evil days. What's he talking about? Well, here's what he's talking about. We don't live in a morally neutral culture, do we? Have you noticed that? I mean, think about it. When is the last time you heard or saw or read an ad that encouraged you to be wise, to be careful, or to be self-controlled? I'm guessing never. I mean, has a sales associate ever suggested you go home and think about it and then come back later before you make the purchase? No, this is on us. We're not going to get much help from culture. The friends around us, perhaps, but not culture. The gravitational pull of culture is now, not later, more, not less. Culture baits us to the line of regret, and then it shames us when that regret becomes a reality. So to anchor your conscience to our fourth question, I want to suggest you ask it from 3 different perspectives: your past, your present, and your future. In fact, this is the version of the question that I taught my kids when they were growing up. We memorized this as a family. In light of my past experience, my current circumstances, and my future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing for me to do? In light of my past experiences, my current circumstances, and my future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing for me to do? Let's talk about your past. You're familiar with the quip, those who can't remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Well, on a personal note, it could be restated this way. Those who don't pay attention to what got them in trouble yesterday are liable to end up in the same trouble tomorrow. I know it's not as catchy, but you get the point. Your past, your personal past, predisposes you to specific temptations, specific addictions, and specific blind spots. Temptations, addictions, and blind spots that may not be temptations, addictions, or blind spots to anybody else. So, in light of your past experience, what is the wise thing for you to do? Every decision, every invitation, every opportunity that comes your way needs to be filtered through your personal history. In light of my past experience, what is the wise thing for me to do? Now, the second angle is connected to what's going on right now, your current circumstances. Because after all, life is seasonal, isn't it? I mean, you owe it to yourself. You owe it to yourself to take your current circumstances and perhaps your current state of mind into account whenever you're making a decision. So, in light of your current circumstances, your current state of mind, your current state of emotion, what's currently going on at work, at home, in your marriage, in light of that relationship you just got out of, in light of your current circumstances, what is the wise thing for you to do now? Maybe not forever, but right now. And then that brings us to our third and final context for this question. In light of my future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing for me to do? Now, every year or so, I ask the people in our organization this disturbing and disrupting question. And the question is, what breaks your heart? I love to ask this question. What breaks your heart? I said it's potentially disruptive because, boy, it's driven people to make all kinds of decisions, big life decisions. It's led people to quit their job, to pursue an opportunity more in line with their passions. It's led people to adopt, to foster, to move, to run for office, to go back into teaching or to finish their education. But let me tell you what breaks my heart. What breaks my heart is watching people make decisions that undermine their future hopes and dreams. It breaks my heart to watch individuals or couples make relationship decisions that will undermine their relationship, current and future. It breaks my heart to watch teenagers make decisions that are going to result in consequences that are going to follow them around for a decade or two, or maybe their entire life. It breaks my heart to watch parent in a way that's eventually going to drive a wedge between them and their children. It breaks my heart to watch people engineer their own unhappiness. Perhaps that's why I'm convinced this third application of our fourth question is the most important application. So let me ask you again. In light of your future hopes and dreams, in light of your picture of a preferred future, what is the wise thing for you to do now? Now, I would imagine you have some idea of what you want your future to look like, right? I mean, you have a mental picture of your preferred future, what could be and what should be. But here's the challenge. When it comes to our dreams, the deck is stacked against us. Life is hard, and life is specifically hard on our dreams, our preferred future. It's an uphill climb. That being the case, come on, why would we contribute to the demise of what we hope for? Why would we allow anyone or anything to rob us of our own future? Why would you allow yourself to rob you of your own future? And here's what I've learned through the years. People don't plan to undermine their own future. People don't plan to undermine their own happiness. They just don't plan not to. And asking and answering and acting on this question is how you plan not to. So, in light of my future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing for me to do? In light of your future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing for you to do? Now, asking our fourth question with the future in mind, I tell you what it'll do. It will put a bright light on the legitimacy of our options. The deceptive shades of gray, they just dissipate almost immediately. Our best option or options become crystal clear when we ask this question, painfully clear. In fact, so clear that we're tempted to look away, so clear that we're tempted to excuse ourselves away. And we say things like this in our head, but I'm not hurting anyone, and I can handle it, and there's no law against it. And besides, God will forgive me. But come on. Our excuses are persuasive because they're mostly true, right? You aren't doing anything wrong yet. You can handle it initially. It isn't illegal. And yes, God will forgive you. But come on. So what? That's all beside the point, right? The purpose of our fourth question isn't to stop you from doing something wrong. It's to keep you from doing something unwise, because unwise is a gateway. Unwise is the gateway to regret. It paves the way to the tipping point, the point of no return. So come on. Let's put away our old worn out excuses once and for all, right? I mean, they've never served you well. They just silence your conscience. They just cloud your reasoning, and they diminish your ability to hear the voices of wisdom around you. You know what your excuses do? Our excuses, they escort us to the threshold of regret. So would you decide to be done with all that? Instead of excusing yourself forward, dream and plan and decide your way forward. Ask the question, in light of my future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing for me to do? And that leads us to our fourth decision, the maturity decision. And the maturity decision is this: I will do the wise thing. I will do the wise thing. In light of where you want to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, what's the wise thing for you to do now? You're going to be somewhere financially, relationally, professionally, or academically 5 or 10 years from now. Shouldn't you decide? Did you know if you don't decide, somebody else will decide for you? If you're single, in light of what you ultimately want relationally, romantically, what's the wisest way to conduct your relationships now? What are you doing now that has the potential to rob you of your preferred future relationally? If you're married and you plan to go the distance with your spouse, to finish together, to perhaps enjoy grandchildren together, what can you do now to facilitate that dream? What puts that dream at risk? What precautions need to be taken now? What is the wise thing to do as it relates to protecting your marriage? Got kids? What do you envision for your relationship with your children? What is the wise thing to do now to protect that dream? Because here's the thing. Everybody ends up somewhere in life. Everybody. I want you to end up somewhere on purpose, and wisdom paves the way to purpose. Now, when sharing this fourth question with high school and college students, I always encourage them to commit this version, this little rhyme to memory. And it goes like this: there's good and there's bad, but that's not my cue, but rather, what is the wise thing to do? There's good and there's bad, but that's not my cue, but rather, what is the wise thing to do? So do yourself a favor. Do your family a favor. Do your marriage a favor. Don't settle for good. Don't settle for legal. Don't settle for permissible. And don't settle for tolerable. You're better than that. You deserve better than that. Your family deserves better than that. So, what is the wise thing for you to do? You are a unique blend of past experiences, current circumstances, and future hopes and dreams. Wisdom allows you to customize the decision-making process to your specific professional, financial, and relational aspirations. So ask it. Ask it even if you don't plan to act on it, because you owe it to yourself to know. And you owe it to the people depending on you to know as well. So, one last time. In light of your past experiences, your current circumstances, and your future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing for you to do? Well, that's it for this session. We're going to pick it up right there next time in session 6, where we explore the relationship question. Don't miss part 6, and have a great discussion.